7 boys, orphans forced into copper mines, never lived beyond 13. Their bodies broken, their names erased. But their fate was only the beginning of something far darker. In 1554, Margareta von Waldeck, beautiful, brilliant, and dangerously close to the Spanish crown, died in Brussels. The records blame illness, but those close to her whispered, poison. Was her real crime being too visible, too uncontainable at court? Historians uncovered fragments, logs from Bavarian mines, parish records, a grave with a puzzling inscription. Each time the story surfaced, it retreated. Documents vanished, archives burned, witnesses were silenced. A coincidence or the mark of a pattern? The famous fairy tale? Forget magic mirrors and singing dwarfs. The real story is child labor, political assassination, and the systematic erasure of one inconvenient girl. What began as warning became a bedtime story, safer for empires, sweeter for children. This is the Pandora's Project. Tonight, we return to the sealed records and forbidden histories. We ask not just who killed Margareta, but why so many tried to erase her story, and why that pattern of silence repeats even today. If you're ready to see where legends end and truth remains, support this work. Subscribe so the next buried secret is not lost to silence, because what you're about to hear is not fantasy. It's evidence. Behind every beautiful story, someone paid the price. Part 1. The Cursed Beauty. There are certain kinds of beauty that the world cannot forgive. Margareta von Waldeck learned this truth the moment she was born into 16th century Bavaria, though it would take years for that lesson to complete itself in blood. Her father was a nobleman who controlled copper mines in the Hesse region of central Germany. Those mines required labor, the kind that came cheap and died quietly. Orphan boys, some barely 10 years old, were sent into the tunnels where most did not live to see their 13th birthday. Crooked spines, crushed hands, lungs filled with copper dust. These were the real dwarfs, and Margareta saw them every day. She watched them stumble from the earth with faces blackened and eyes hollow, and something inside her broke. While other daughters of nobility learned embroidery and submission, Margareta brought the boys food in secret. She cooled their wounds with water and cloth. She told them stories when they could not sleep. To them, she was not a lady but the only proof that mercy still existed. One of the boys kept a diary, and years later, when that diary surfaced, it contained a single repeated entry. The White Lady smiles at us. She cries for us. She says we will soon sleep and it will not hurt. 7 boys survived longer than the others. 7 boys who would later vanish under circumstances no one dared investigate. But that part of the story comes later, after Margareta had survived her own house. When she was young, her mother died. Some claimed the woman had gone mad, staring too long at her daughter's face as if she had seen something cursed in it. Her father remarried quickly to a young woman who was wealthy and skilled in the art of poison. Not the theatrical poison of fairy tales, but the real kind that could be mistaken for illness. Nightshade slipped into wine. Hemlock ground into bread. This woman saw Margareta not as a stepdaughter, but as a rival, and in a world where women were currency, Margareta had become dangerously valuable. As a teenager, Margareta was sent to Brussels for education. That was the official story. The truth was simpler and darker. Her father was hiding her from the stepmother, who had begun to speak openly of removing obstacles. In Brussels, Margareta entered a court thick with intrigue and the calculating marriage politics of the Spanish Habsburgs. And there, she met the Spanish crown prince who was captivated by her, who spoke of marriage, and that single conversation signed her death warrant. A foreign girl, beautiful and clever, with influence over the future king of Spain. This was a pattern that would repeat across cultures and centuries. From Anne Boleyn in England to countless women in courts across the world, History is filled with those who became too valuable, too influential, too dangerous. The powerful have always had the same solution. Margareta began to change. Servants in Brussels reported strange behavior. She was seen in gardens at night, speaking to herself, pulling dead leaves from rose stems with hands that bled from thorns. Maids swore they heard her talking to mirrors in a language no one recognized. Was she going mad, or had she sensed what was coming? Some believe she saw her own death reflected in those mirrors. Others think she was trying to warn herself across time. Either way, she knew the net was tightening around her. What Margareta could not have known was how thoroughly she would be erased, how her story would be sanitized, sweetened, and sold to children, how the boys she tried to protect would become cartoon characters, how her murder would become a kiss. But before the erasure could be complete, she had to die. And someone very powerful had to make certain that death looked like anything other than what it was. Part 2. Poison and Betrayal. The symptoms appeared so suddenly that even the doctors were caught off guard. Margareta, who had been healthy and vibrant just days before, began to wither as if something were consuming her from within. First came nausea, then vomiting that left blood on her lips. Her skin turned the color of old parchment. Her body folded inward, collapsing like a building whose foundation had been poisoned. Doctors were summoned and offered diagnoses that meant nothing. Imbalance of humors. Weakness of constitution. Divine punishment. No one said the word that hung in every room like smoke. Poison. Because to say it aloud was to accuse someone, and accusations required investigations, and investigations threatened people who could not afford to be threatened. So Margareta died in silence at 21 years old. Her eyes remained open, as if she were still waiting for someone to tell her why. The official record lists natural illness, but servants whispered about a small glass vial found in her chamber with traces of nightshade, the same plant that had ended inconvenient lives for centuries. No one was arrested. No one questioned. The case was closed before it opened. The answer to why lies in what Margareta represented. She was not just a girl, but a political variable that had moved too close to the center of power. Her marriage to the Spanish prince would have shifted alliances, threatened treaties, upended carefully negotiated agreements between kingdoms. The men who ruled Europe could not allow one beautiful face to unravel their architecture, so they removed her cleanly and quietly with the kind of precision that only comes from practice. Back in Bavaria, the 7 mining boys who had loved her learned of her death. What they did next has been carefully erased from most accounts, but fragments remain. 2 of the boys disappeared within days of her funeral. One was found hanging in the mine shaft, though his hands showed signs of being bound. The other was discovered in the forest, torn apart in a way that suggested animals, though no animal tracks were found. The remaining 5 scattered, and their names vanished from all records after that year as if they never existed. Why kill children who had already been forgotten by the world? Because they knew her. Because she had trusted them with her fears. Because witnesses, even child witnesses, even disposable witnesses, are liabilities. But death did not end Margareta's story. It transformed it. Within months, locals in the Bavarian forests began reporting sightings of a pale woman in dark clothing, wandering between trees, always holding something in her hand. Some said it was a rotten apple. Others claimed it was a broken mirror. She did not speak or touch the ground, but moved like smoke, like grief, like something that could not rest. A woodcutter swore he watched her stand outside his cottage for an entire night, staring through the window with an expressionless face. When dawn came, she was gone. But his children fell ill that same week, and all 3 died within days of each other. The forest was declared cursed. Travelers avoided it. Locals left offerings at the tree line of withered roses, broken mirrors, and blackened apples. These were rituals meant to appease something that had no interest in appeasement, because Margareta was not haunting the forest out of malice. She was searching for justice, for acknowledgement, for someone to say her name and mean it. Her stepmother did not outlive her by long. Within 2 years, the woman fell mysteriously ill. Servants reported seeing her talking to mirrors, clawing at her own reflection, screaming that someone was watching her. She died alone with her face frozen in an expression of terror. The family estate burned that same night with no cause ever determined. Records of Margareta's life, her letters, her belongings, everything that proved she had existed went up in flames. Over the next century, every document connected to Margareta von Waldeck began to disappear. Court records, mining logs, parish registries. Even her grave would later be found empty, as if her body had been removed and hidden. Someone with power and resources wanted her gone. Not just dead, but erased. But erasure is never complete. Stories have a way of surviving, especially when they carry the weight of injustice. Monks in the 17th century recorded accounts of the white lady who appeared in sick rooms, who touched the dying and whispered in a language no one recognized. One monk wrote, "She came with the scent of earth and dead flowers. She brought either peace or madness." By the 18th century, a Lutheran pastor documented multiple cases of women dying from nightshade poisoning. In each instance, a broken mirror was found beside the body, always with the same signature. A single letter carved into the glass. M. The most disturbing discovery came in the 19th century when authorities attempted to exhume her remains. The grave at Bad Münstereifel was opened and found empty. No bones, no clothing, no coffin remains. Only a cracked mirror and a withered apple, black with age. The case was closed, the grave resealed, and once again, silence descended like a curtain over a stage where something terrible had just occurred. Part 3. The Spirit and the Erasure. By the 19th century, something strange had happened to Margareta's story. It had become softer, safer, almost unrecognizable. Folklorists traveling through Bavaria collected fragments from villagers who still remembered. Not the truth, but shadows of it. A beautiful girl, a jealous stepmother, a poisoned apple. 7 protectors. The details had been smoothed by time and repetition, but the bones of the story remained. These early versions were still darker than what would come later, still too close to the truth, still too dangerous. In the late 1800s, a folklorist named Karl von Schroeder attempted to publish a comprehensive account. He had traced the story back to Margareta von Waldeck. He had found parish records, mining logs, fragments of letters. He knew her name and how she died, and he prepared to tell the world. Then the warnings arrived. Colleagues told him he was disturbing the dead. His publisher was threatened. Days before the book was to be printed, the printing house burned to the ground with every copy destroyed. Schroeder himself fell silent and never published the work again. When asked years later why he had abandoned the project, he would only say, "Some truths are protected by people who do not want them known." By the early 20th century, the story had been sanitized further. The poisoned girl became a princess. The mining boys became dwarfs. The political assassination became a jealous queen with a magic mirror. It was safe now, harmless, ready for children. And that is when Hollywood found it. In 1937, Walt Disney released Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the first feature-length animated film. It was a cultural phenomenon that made audiences weep and critics celebrate. The world embraced a story of innocence, beauty, and true love's kiss. But behind the scenes, Disney's team had access to research. Internal documents show they consulted European folklore collections, including rare editions that mentioned Margareta by name. They knew the story came from a real girl who had been murdered. They knew about the child labor, the poison, the cover-up. and they made a deliberate choice to bury it deeper, to replace horror with songs, to turn a warning into a fantasy. During production, strange things occurred. Voice actors reported hearing whispers in empty recording booths. An animator claimed he saw a pale woman reflected in the glass of his workspace, watching him draw. A crew member quit abruptly, telling colleagues that something was wrong with this story and they should not be telling it this way. Disney dismissed the incidents as superstition and stress. The production continued. The film was completed. But something remained in the footage. Years later, during audio restoration, sound engineers discovered an anomaly. In the scene where the evil queen gazes into her mirror, there is a whisper beneath the dialogue, too faint to hear in theaters. But when amplified and isolated, it is unmistakable. A voice speaking in Old German. Ich war nicht tot. I was not dead. The audio was archived and never included in any remastered release. The engineers were told not to discuss it. And once again, silence. In the 1990s, a German researcher named Dr. Erika Feldman published an academic paper linking Snow White directly to Margareta. She provided documentation, traced the timeline, named the individuals involved in the original cover-up. Her work was rigorous, sourced, undeniable, and she was destroyed for it. Feldman received threats. Her home was broken into twice, though nothing was stolen. Her research files disappeared. Colleagues distanced themselves. Universities refused to host her lectures. Within 2 years, she had left Germany entirely. Her last public statement was a single sentence: "Some stories do not want to stay quiet." Copies of her work still circulate in academic circles, though they are difficult to find. In them, she documents not just Margareta's death, but the systematic effort to erase her across 5 centuries. She names institutions, traces financial connections, suggests that the same families who benefited from Margareta's murder still exist, still hold power, and still have an interest in keeping the truth buried. In the 1950s, an internal memo from a major studio warned, "Avoid any public connection between our Snow White property and Margareta von Waldeck. It could damage the brand and expose the company to legal complications. Legal complications from a girl who died in 1554. Unless there were descendants. Unless there were families who still carried the guilt and the liability of her murder. Unless the erasure was not historical but ongoing." In 1983, a studio technician working on archival film claimed he found an unused audio clip. A woman's voice, sobbing, whispering in German, "Warum lügt ihr? Why do you lie?" He kept a copy on tape and planned to investigate further. He was found dead in his home weeks later. The tape was beside him, melted into an unrecognizable mass. The official cause was an electrical fire, though the rest of the room showed no signs of heat damage. No smoke, no burns, just a destroyed tape and a dead man. Authorities closed the case quickly with no investigation and no questions. The same silence that followed Margareta in 1554 followed those who tried to speak her name in 1983. Part 4. The Pattern Revealed. Modern productions of Snow White are plagued by incidents that crews whisper about but never discuss publicly. And the pattern is always the same. Lights explode during mirror scenes. Props move between takes. Actors report feeling watched by something they cannot see. In one recent adaptation, an actress fainted after looking into a prop mirror on set. When she regained consciousness, she described what she had seen. Not her own reflection, but a woman standing behind her. Pale, dark-haired, crying blood. The production continued. The incident was not mentioned in press materials, but the actress left the project shortly after and has refused all roles involving fairy tales since. Writers who have attempted to tell the true story report similar experiences. One screenwriter working on a historical drama about Margareta suffered a stroke at age 42, losing function in his right hand so he could no longer write. His script was never completed and remains locked in a studio archive, inaccessible to researchers. Another writer experienced a series of escalating misfortunes. Her publisher dropped the project. Her agent stopped returning calls. Her home was burglarized, though only her research materials were taken. She abandoned the book and has not written since. When asked why, she would only say, "I was made to understand that some stories have guardians, and those guardians are not interested in the truth." The question becomes unavoidable. Why do these incidents cluster around Snow White specifically? Why do those who attempt to tell the real story suffer accidents, career destruction, and mysterious illnesses? The answer lies in what Margareta's story actually reveals. She was not just a victim of one jealous stepmother. She was a casualty of a political system that could not tolerate her existence. A foreign girl with influence over a Spanish prince threatened alliances between kingdoms, religious agreements between Catholic and Protestant powers, economic treaties worth more than any single life. Her beauty made her valuable. Her intelligence made her dangerous. And her connection to power made her impossible to ignore. So she was removed, not in a dramatic public execution that would raise questions, but quietly through poison that could be mistaken for illness. This was not unique to Margareta. Anne Boleyn in England was accused of adultery and treason, beheaded because she threatened the stability Henry VIII needed. Countless women in imperial courts across the world were poisoned because they influenced the wrong prince or threatened the wrong alliance. Women across cultures and centuries who became too powerful, too visible, too inconvenient. The method is always the same. Discredit them, isolate them, remove them, then rewrite the story so their deaths seem justified, natural, or mythical. Margareta's story was transformed into a fairy tale not to honor her, but to ensure no one would take it seriously. To make certain that anyone who said her name would sound like they believed in magic rather than murder. The erasure is the point, and it continues. Before Margareta died, she was visited by a nun in Brussels. The nun later wrote a letter describing their final conversation. Margareta did not cry. She said she had already cried too much. She only asked not to be left alone with the mirror, saying it showed her things no one should see. The nun's letter ends with a single line: "The dead do not rest when the living lie about them." That letter was discovered in a monastery archive in 1920. It was photographed, translated, and prepared for publication. Before it could be released, the monastery burned. The original letter was destroyed. Only the photographs survive, kept in private collections and inaccessible to the public. This is the pattern. Evidence surfaces. It is documented. Then it is destroyed or hidden before it can reach a wide audience. For 5 centuries, this cycle has repeated. Margareta's grave at Bad Münstereifel still exists. The headstone bears an inscription that has puzzled historians. She who saw but could not speak, who loved but was not heard. There is no date of death listed, no family name beyond von Waldeck. It is as if someone wanted to acknowledge her existence while simultaneously obscuring it. Locals refuse to visit the grave at night, saying the air around it feels wrong. Heavy, cold. Some claim they have seen a figure standing beside the headstone, a woman in dark clothing who vanishes when approached. The grave has been vandalized multiple times, with each vandal claiming they were trying to help, that they felt compelled to dig, that something underneath was calling to them. Margareta von Waldeck is not a ghost story. She is a test, a measure of whether we are willing to see the truth beneath the tale, whether we will acknowledge that the stories we tell children often began as warnings about the cruelty of power, whether we will admit that beauty, intelligence, and visibility can still be a death sentence for women who threaten the wrong people. Her story is dangerous, not because it is supernatural, but because it is political, because it names a system that still operates, Because it asks questions that powerful institutions would prefer remain unasked. Who benefits from the lie? Who profits from the sanitized version? Who loses if the truth is told? Margareta waits in mirrors, in forests, in the static between audio tracks. She waits for someone to tell her story correctly, to say her name and mean it, to acknowledge that she was not a fairy tale princess, but a real girl who was murdered for political convenience. And every time someone tries, every time someone gets close, the machinery activates. The threats arrive. The evidence disappears. The projects are shut down, as if after 5 centuries, the truth is still too dangerous to speak aloud. Final part. The breaking seals. The real Snow White was never about magic. It was about a girl who had to die so that empires could remain stable. Margareta von Waldeck was beautiful, intelligent, and connected to power. 3 things that made her valuable. 3 things that made her impossible to control. And so she was removed. Her death was disguised as illness. Her story was rewritten as fantasy. Her name was erased from records, her body taken from her grave, her truth buried beneath 5 centuries of deliberate lies. But truth has weight. It does not disappear simply because it is inconvenient. It waits in mirrors that reflect something other than your face, in forests where travelers still vanish, in the static of old recordings, in the accidents that plague those who try to speak her name. Margareta von Waldeck is not finished with us. She will not rest until her story is told correctly, until someone acknowledges that she was murdered, until the world admits that the fairy tale they love began with poison, child labor, and a cover-up that required the resources of kingdoms and the cooperation of Hollywood. This is why her story matters. Not because it is unique, but because it is universal. Because the pattern repeats. Because powerful people still eliminate those who threaten them, still rewrite the narrative, still count on our willingness to believe the sanitized version. Next time you hear a fairy tale, ask yourself whose pain was hidden here, whose truth was rewritten, what warning was turned into a song. Because behind every beautiful story, there is often a buried body and a question no one wanted asked. If this revelation helped you see what was concealed, support this work with a like. Subscribe so you are here when the next sealed document is opened. And in the comments, tell us which version of Snow White did you grow up with, and what do you think was removed? Because Margareta's story is not over. It is simply waiting for enough people to hear it. See you in the next tomb.